Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Trey Walsh, and today is actually going to be my final day of hosting The Progressive Bitcoiner, and I'm honored to do this with none other than Margot Paez, who's been our most frequent guest on the show since I've been hosting over the past year and a half. And I've been posting for a few weeks now about our decision to kind of close up the show with me as host, our priority in looking to rebooting Money as another brand and going forward. And there's a few different reasons that I've chosen to make this decision at this time that we talk about in the episode that I've posted before as well. And a lot of it has to do with I'm going to be entering into a new chapter of my life and entering into fatherhood in the next couple of months. So taking a step back from doing things, focusing on family, focusing on my nonprofit job that I really love and care about, and taking a step back from this. And, you know, even in this intro, I'm not going to be able to thank everyone and show as much appreciation as I have for everyone that has listened, that supported the show, the guests that we've had on, the people that have been mentors and advisors and spoken with me and provided words of encouragement and all of these other things. Just far too many to mention even in this short intro for this episode. But this definitely won't be the last you're hearing from me. Going to just take a step back for a little bit, prioritize, refocus, do what I need to do and focus on. And we get into some of the other decisions as well and things in this episode, talking with Margot about, you know, what kind of happened to the progressive movement? Where are things going? Where can progressives in the left that might feel a little bit politically homeless find themselves in Bitcoin and things like that going forward? Some of my thoughts on wanting to focus on Bitcoin and talk about Bitcoin in less political ways going forward. Our biggest focus here has always been appealing to people, to voters, talking about how Bitcoin is for everyone in these nonpartisan ways. And I'd like to explore new ways of doing that in less of a progressive or a left-right way, and just focusing on the path forward, focusing on Bitcoin education, focusing on nonpartisan efforts and things like that, which I'm excited to explore in the future. But first of all, taking a step back, focusing on family and doing that is the right decision for me at this time. So I will let you all get into that, into this episode, in this conversation with Margot that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I know you all will as well. If you want to reach out to me, you always can. I'm available on Telegram, Signal, hello@progressivebitcoiner.com as well. I'm on Nostr. I'll still be around for folks to reach out, to get in touch, and we'll be focusing on rebooting Money in the next couple of months. But please reach out, stay in touch. Would love to hear from people. And I'll let you get into the episode now. And this won't be the last that you hear from me. So take care, everyone. Thank you so much for all of your support and for listening to the show over the past year and a half that I've been hosting it. And enjoy this episode, and take care. And we'll talk to you soon. Hey, Margot, welcome back to the Progressive Bitcoiner. How are you?
Hi. Hi, Trey. I'm good. Thank you for having me. Very sad that this is the last episode, but thank you for putting me on your last episode.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's definitely feels right. Kind of a gut decision on my end. I've kind of posted and talked for a while. I've said on this podcast so far, I'm like expecting our first child in a couple of months. Work is like crazy and busy. I moved into a new place, still here in Massachusetts, in greater Boston area. So yeah, there's a lot of things. And after doing this for over a year, important to step back. And a lot of people have been really sweet and gracious and reaching out and thanking me, and even thanking just the efforts of so many, and even Mark before, and a lot of us that are involved in what gets labeled as progressive Bitcoiner, right? But is really just kind of left-leaning or not the typical anarcho-cap libertarian Bitcoiner stereotype that's been around the space for the last few years. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I've said this before. I'm sure that when I record the intro, it'll be in there as well. But I think the future of the progressive Bitcoiner, of this platform, we'll still see what that looks like. I know for me, I will not be the consistent and regular host on this, but there is potential that there will be another host of this under our umbrella of rebooting Money that Evan from my team and I are working on as like a nonprofit publication, putting out more stuff. So yeah, I'm excited to have you as the last guest, at least for me, hosting the progressive Bitcoiner. And what I wanted to do in this episode is, because it's been just a little bit, maybe for some for some new folks trickling in, or also just people listening, is talk with you about one of our favorite topics, really, which is just what are those progressive left elements of, not elements of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is nonpartisan, Bitcoin is code, all of these things, but why should progressives be interested in Bitcoin? And there's so many reasons that I hope more and more people will continue to learn about Bitcoin through your work with Bitcoin mining, through thinking about human rights, thinking about everyday people, average people. I mean, we're here in the U.S., so some of this might be a little U.S. focused, but around the world. So I wanted to break that down with you as well. And maybe one place we can start, that it's been a little bit since we've talked specifically on the podcast, is about Bitcoin mining. There's so much new stuff happening all the time in Bitcoin, but just kicking it off with a broad question, pretending someone is just coming into the show, maybe sees the title, maybe sees someone shared about it. Here's a little bit about Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. Why should progressives or environmentalists be interested in Bitcoin or pay attention to it and not write it off as this thing that's destroying our planet?
Well, this is a very good question. Let's see if I'm awake enough to answer it.
Should we wait for your PhD to cut your thesis to come out and more stuff?
Yeah. No, well, it would be, I don't know who would want to read that, but look, Bitcoin mining gets a lot of bad rep, or has a bad reputation in the past. Some of that has changed over the last few years. But the narrative around Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining in particular has been that it's very wasteful. It's energy wasteful. It uses a lot of energy on top of that. Not only is it wasteful, it uses a lot of energy. And then because of that, it is very carbon intensive. So therefore, it's so bad we have to get rid of it. Ban it. Anyone who cares about the climate should be just furious that this thing exists because it wastes so much energy. Okay. Well, first of all, it is true that Bitcoin miners use a lot of energy. That is definitely true. We can't deny that. But so do a lot of industries, and so do a lot of data centers. And Bitcoin mining is a type of data center. So in that sense, it's not that different from, the facilities that hold all of our cat videos, or, whatever your favorite thing to watch, all of those workout videos that are on YouTube. I mean, there are a lot of yoga videos, and I know everybody watches at least one fitness video, has at least watched one in their life. So there's a lot of that. All of your personal photos, that they're in the cloud. Like, what is the cloud? It's just a facility, a building filled with computers. And instead of keeping your photos on your computer or on your phone, you're keeping them on a computer located somewhere else, probably in Virginia or Ohio or someplace like that. And those computers use a lot of energy too. So it's not unique in that sense that Bitcoin uses a lot of energy. Now, people think it's wasteful because they only see speculation as the dominant narrative around Bitcoin. Bitcoin bros out there spending their stimmy checks and, going all in, hodl, paper hands, diamond hands, whatever, right? Like, that is what most people think of when they think of Bitcoin. They think, oh, it's just like this gambling thing. It's a casino. And it's true that many people do use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies like this as a way to gamble, as a way to speculate. So we can't deny that either. But at the same time, Bitcoin is different because it is also being used as a money, as a way to get around authoritarian governments, as a way of taking financial control of your life, especially in places where bank accounts are frozen arbitrarily if you speak out against a government, for example, or you live in a place where you have hyperinflation and you need some kind of store of value. You're either going to store it in dollars or you're going to store it in Bitcoin, probably. So there are really important use cases. And then if you're an activist, you should really be thinking about Bitcoin, because you are a target of the government because you are an activist. You are dissenting. And in this world today, all governments are cracking down on free speech. And it's only, you may not even notice it because right now you're on the same side as the government in power, as the political party in power. But that can change. We're having an election coming up in the US in just a few months, and that could change instantly. And you could be in trouble. You could be somebody that the government goes after and starts freezing your bank accounts. And then what are you going to do, right? So these are all really important concerns that I think people who are on the left or who care about climate change or anything, Black lives, if you are seriously contradicting the narrative of the state, you probably should look into Bitcoin. So that's basically a counter argument to this wastefulness. If you find any value in Bitcoin, it's not wasteful. So a lot of people still, especially in the US, don't see the value of it because we live in general under the dollar, which is still a very strong currency, even with inflation, type of inflation we've had. So people don't really have those fears. And then people also don't necessarily feel as politically threatened in the US. So they may not feel those fears either. But I think anyone who cares about other people around the world and what they go through, and the fact that, like over 80% of the world lives under authoritarian regimes, if you care about that, then you should care about financial freedom. So Bitcoin isn't really wasteful. So it does use a lot of energy, but it's not so different from any other data center in that sense. It can be wasteful, can appear to be wasteful, but there are many other use cases than just speculation, which if you don't like that, that's fine. But maybe you can appreciate the other aspects that coexist simultaneously. So I think that those are the key points. And then also on the environmental side, Bitcoin mining is actually very interesting, because even though there has been a lot of research on data centers and being flexible, which is like powering on and off their system, their servers, or shifting workloads, there's tons of research, no doubt, on methods and optimization tools to actually make this happen. But in the real world, it's not that common. Most data centers stay powered on with constant power draw. Like they're constantly consuming power. And as we bring on more renewable energy, particularly wind and solar, we need loads like data centers to be able to power off, reduce their power consumption at specific times, or increase their power consumption at other times. That's called load flexibility or demand side flexibility. The thing is, as I said, most data centers don't do this, and only a few have really started to show this capability, and it's really only these big companies, mega corporations like Google. But then you have Bitcoin. You have Bitcoin miners that are a kind of data center, but they can do this, and they do it very well, and they're very effective at it. And if you have the right incentives, the right market structure, they can be very flexible. So that can really benefit balancing that wind and solar that only powers on at certain times. So that is something that makes it really unique. So if you can really harness that flexibility of Bitcoin miners, which they are really capable of doing above and beyond really any other data center right now, then you can actually bring on more renewable energy, because you can have that flexibility to meet that renewable energy where it is. And when demand starts to peak, you can return that power back to the grid. So that's a really unique and special thing about Bitcoin mining that maybe a lot of people don't fully appreciate. It's not, it's not the big, it's not a scam to either to provide that as insurance. That's something that is common that electrical grids do all the time. They do pay buildings, not just Bitcoin miners, to power down. So that's really interesting. And then also, again, these incentive structures of Bitcoin make it possible to go out and capture and monetize wasted energy that otherwise could not have been monetized, because there were really no flexible off-takers that could do in the way that Bitcoin mining can. So you have people trying to harness flared gas, for example, or landfill gas. You have people setting up facilities with geothermal energy, trying to do that. You have the model that Gridless has in Kenya and I think Zambia on the African continent, where they are going to these existing small mini hydro grids, and they're buyers of first and last resort. And what that does is it makes these grids viable economically, so that they can be there long enough so that the consumers, that the people in the community can go out and buy the electronics that they need to plug in to actually get that electricity, to make use of it. And it also can help bring down the costs. So that then is huge in the sense of energy poverty and leapfrogging technologically, because it's really hard to reach people who are in these rural areas for a variety of reasons. But if you can find a way to finance that, you're bringing people standard of living up considerably, because now they're going to have electricity, and that can support hospitals, and that's going to bring up the standard of living immensely, because they will have access to life-saving technologies that we take for granted in the West. So there are a lot of these second-order things that come out of Bitcoin mining, and just because of how the network's protocol is designed. So there are so many great things here about Bitcoin that I think anybody who considers themselves on the left or progressive can really appreciate. And I think that some people get also, like the more diehards, get caught up on the monetary cap and think of it like as this right-wing thing. But I think that's wrong too, because there's a whole concern around the ecology and ecological economics and constraints on natural resources. And so I think that there is kind of an old-fashioned or backward thinking around economics and abundance and sustainability here that is lacking and not really being discussed amongst progressives. So I went through every point that I could think of to try to make the case. Trey, just let me know.
Yeah, no.
If I missed anything.
No, that's great. No. I mean, first of all, one thing that I've been very comfortable with over the past while now, especially with Bitcoin, is that there is a way for you to watch or listen to, you might have spoken for 10, 12 minutes, whatever, on that. You can watch a video, you can hear a clip to get a glimpse of Bitcoin. But like studying anything, especially a new paradigm technology, something as important as like this monetary technological revolution, mining, all this stuff, it takes time to sit with it, read books on it, watch more videos on it. There's more content than ever year after year on Bitcoin. There's more academic and research being published on Bitcoin. So it takes a while to sit with all these things. You have to learn. You talk about all these second order effects. There's a lot to learn about I just kind of caught glimpses getting into Bitcoin. Before Bitcoin, I had no idea about like how energy markets and grids worked, how economics in a lot of ways practically worked around the world with like the IMF and the World Bank and even the Federal Reserve and all of these things. So it's simple in one regard, like it's kind of a simple dumb code base in a lot of ways, or simple these kind of 21 million cap, difficulty adjustment, things like that with mining. But you really got to sit with it. It's very different and unique, especially for those that are not in the cypherpunk cryptography space the past 30 years. As like I'm not nerdy at all. I'm not computer science at all. I had to learn a little bit because I want to hold Bitcoin right and do all of these things. So people need to really take time with it in a, I don't know if this is corny or not, just in an age where it's like, okay, a TikTok, let me see what I can learn in 30 seconds. And Bitcoin's kind of the antithesis to that. It's kind of like, you can't learn everything you need to in 30 seconds or 10 minutes. You have to sit with it and study it. One more point I wanted to ask you though, on the environmental piece that you talk about regularly, is kind of the concept at a certain level of degrowth, or something that environmentalists, whether it's like, trendy environmentalists on social media or hardcore environmentalists, so people that are just trying to do more with less, whether it's buying less clothing, being more responsible with energy use and things like this, in this age of buy more, more, more. What are some of the ways that Bitcoin incentivizes that, just based on its economics, based on its hardness of money, based on its deflationary properties in a way of, things over time cost less and less Bitcoin, where over time things cost more and more dollars, more and more in that way. So can you talk a little bit about the degrowth? Maybe I know there's some, I think you even posted this recently. There's like, some people will say, well, degrowth is bad in this way, but kind of the concept of just wanting to not have to spend so much, encourage savings, and how that can possibly positively affect the environment.
Yeah, so I think what Bitcoin does when you really start to interact with it and understand it is it makes you, or it helps you take a look at the world through a different lens. So suddenly you see the world differently, and you think, why is my currency being devalued? Why am I having to work harder and for a raise just to make a living? Why do property values go up? Like, why is it, why do I have to buy a house and hope that the value goes up so that I can build generational wealth? But then what happens if the market crashes and I lose everything and everything is in this house? I think, it all goes back to these ideas and concerns, this raising of consciousness that happened during the Occupy movement after the Great Recession. And I do think of it as a moment of consciousness raising, because it was really for the first time that people were coming together and they were saying, what is going on? The banks got bailed out and we did not. The banks went after my home and I got no justice for that. A lot of people were illegally foreclosed on and lost their homes. They were targeted. And they were also blamed for it in a lot of ways. A lot of homeowners were blamed because of the subprime mortgage crisis. But, it really isn't fair to blame these people who took out these particular loans, because they were not the ones that were creating derivatives and speculating and creating all of this financial instability. And then the failures of the Federal Reserve to handle this crisis, it put a lot of people out, and I don't think it's fair to blame them. And a lot of these people have not fully recovered from that recession. So we had that happen, and then we had Occupy a few years later under a Democratic president. And people started they were angry because they saw that while the economy was seemingly getting better, assets were inflating, but they were still at a job, or they were getting new jobs that didn't have all the benefits that they had before the recession, or they were worse jobs, or they were only part-time jobs. This was what was happening. And people said, enough is enough. This whole banking system is totally screwed up. The economy is rigged against me. It's the 99% versus the 1%. And that was a really, really important conscious raising moment that was missing a solution, or a step towards a solution. And then we get something like Bitcoin, which then really shows us in practice what it is that you're feeling during those days. Now, and then during COVID, we had a lot of inflation. And I think that also made that even more poignant to people who were coming to Bitcoin and saying, like, wow, okay, the government targets inflation and it's completely arbitrary. They say this 2% thing, but why? There's nothing in the academic literature that says 2% is the optimal number. There's absolutely nothing. You can ask the economists at BPI and they'll tell you it is arbitrary and why are you doing this? So that is, that I think that's also a contrast to what we see with Bitcoin, which is actually, here's a Bitcoin that can preserve my purchasing power, that can allow me to save. And once you realize that I don't have to constantly be chasing dollars, then you start seeing where this is affecting us in a lot of different parts of society, that we're constantly having to chase more money. And we are also being forced to cut corners in a lot of areas, like fashion, for example, products. And some of this, isn't just about the money itself, but it's a big component of it. It's also a feature of capitalism, but this, like this built-in obsolescence. But I mean, I've read stuff about fast fashion, and like, in order to keep those prices down, to keep them from inflating, you have to start making cheaper products too. So you're being pushed towards cheaper and cheaper materials. And then, your clothes fall apart like 6 months later, your clothes have holes in them. You have to buy something new. I bought a pair of socks that I thought were pretty good quality at Uniqlo like a year ago, and they are almost unwearable now. And it was really shocking. Like, these socks aren't even a year old and they're falling apart. And really, I'm really noticing that. And I think other people are noticing that. So they start seeing, like, okay, there's so many wasteful aspects of our society because we're being forced to make purchases now rather than in the future. And we're being forced to fight against inflation, and that's masking a lot of the problems. So when you have an opportunity to take a look at the world around you through a different lens, you start realizing, okay, something is wrong, and I can do something about that. And here's this tool called Bitcoin, and I can make a different choice. And then when it comes to the environment, which I think was really your original question, is that inflationary money has the incentive for us to borrow from the future. We have a lot of debt, and we have to keep borrowing debt to keep things functioning. We keep building up our debt. We've been doing that since the mid 70s, and that's a real extractive effect. Has real extractive effect on the environment. So we're destroying our planet. And a lot of that has to do with how the economic incentives work in our society with all this debt and borrowing. And if we could change that, if we could have a constraint economically using a money that has a cap on it, has a monetary cap, like 21 million Bitcoin, I think that we could actually realign ourselves under a much more sustainable economic system that wouldn't be about constantly growing, because you have to grow under this kind of economic system that we live in. It's do or die. But growth is not necessarily a good thing. It doesn't have to be, and like not growing doesn't have to be a bad thing. Part of the problem is that we have all this debt. If we remove the debt, we wouldn't have that problem. And if you had money that made it really hard to have a lot of debt, and would make you think twice about whether you're going to, take on all this interest and borrow from the future. I think in an ideal world that would be very helpful for us in managing our natural resources and creating an entirely new way of living. And there's a lot of steps between here and there, but I do think that Bitcoin is very much compatible with an ecological economic framework and a degrowth framework as well, one that is sustainable and, focuses more on the joys of life and less work, So I think that's where all that is aligned with. I think Bitcoin, there's really no conflict with Bitcoin.
I think an interesting point too, because there's almost two extremes sometimes where Bitcoin won't help anything, it doesn't fix anything, and it's just a nuisance, or Bitcoin fixes everything. It's more like I've always tried to focus on Bitcoin as a tool, that it still takes good people doing the right thing in a lot of different spheres, whether it's environmental, human rights, activism, government and politics, right? Like if you're in a position of power, be it your local town, state, federal government, whatever, it still takes people doing the right thing. There is a trustless model to Bitcoin in terms of the actual software and things like that. It's very, very good. But Bitcoin is this tool that can be used for good and bad, hypothetically, as a money. Like different states and foreign actors can use Bitcoin just like we can in the US here. So it takes, I think Bitcoin is ripe for being understood by environmentalists, by people that believe in something other than, because a lot of what you were talking about, I just kept thinking about the stock market and how any company, they constantly every quarter need to see growth. Like Apple needs to sell more iPhones or else. We don't necessarily need more iPhones. We don't need a new iPhone every 6 months or a year. We need a way to say, how about one every 5 years? How can we build those things, right? You were mentioning clothes, like even thinking about the materials and labor and everything behind that. Like I go buy a pair of Levi's today and they're like thinner. They feel different than 10 years ago, even, right? And companies are dealing with a currency that's inflating. They're dealing with also trying to meet their expectations from shareholders that you must grow X number of percent, just growth no matter what. And Bitcoin does flip a lot of that on its head as a tool, mixed with people who believe in seeing the world being different, right? So Bitcoin in and of itself can help be a positive tool, but it also takes people willing to say, I think we should live differently. I think we shouldn't be so obsessed with growth and destruction and working as much as possible to the bone or any of these things to see life in a different way. So in that way, I think Bitcoiners around the world are incredibly hopeful people, and Bitcoin is a tool to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I have always considered it a tool, not like Bitcoin fixes everything, because it's just, there's always going to be problems. But I think giving people an opportunity to experience real freedom, like monetary freedom with a network that doesn't have intermediaries and you don't have to get permission to use it. You don't have to have permission to mine Bitcoin either. It's just very hard. But you could, I can do it on my laptop right now if I wanted to. So that is, I think that's really empowering. And I've had this conversation before where I was telling a friend about it, and he was like, well, who decides who mines Bitcoin? Like, well, nobody. And it's this realization that a lot of people don't even, are so conditioned to have permission to do anything that they have no idea. They've never experienced the alternative. So yeah, I agree. It's an important tool. And I also agree that it's a very valuable tool in the hands of people who want to change the world for the better. If you really want to do something powerful, something significant, if you want to get out of the existing system, then this is an important tool, because you're going to, at least temporarily, wherever you think the system should be in the end, you're going to need money in between as you go in and out. So you might as well use a money that has no intermediaries, that doesn't have somebody trying to control you, that someone isn't going to be, confiscate your funds in case something happens. You're in full control. And honestly, having that full control is really empowering, very impactful, changes. I mean, anytime I send anything from like on Lightning and I'm like in another part of the world and my node is here and at home, and it's like, wow, I did all that with my node and it's like halfway around the world. And I'm like, I can do this anytime. It's very cool. It's a really cool experience, at least for me. So I think, we need more people who have the right vision to use Bitcoin to create something better. And it's actually, I think that's something that really bothers me, and that we really haven't reached a lot of those people, that for some reason we're still very disconnected from those groups, and it's really hard to reach them. And Trey, you mentioned that I made this post recently, I think it was even yesterday, about this guy who's a degrowther, and he's talking about, the only way forward is this like super lo-fi, go back to, like washing clothes together. And I imagine him like with the
laundromat that's not a laundromat guy.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
I was
so
like,
funny.
It sounds like a laundromat. Yeah. But like what I imagined was even more primitive, which was like the way people used to wash. They had these like metal corrugated
washboards on the riverbanks. Yeah.
Like you really want to go back to that. And I think it's really fascinating, Trey, because there is this, it's really interesting, like in the left and in like a lot of Marxist theory and thought, there was this element of this kind of like primitivism, and that was like this primitive capitalism, like pre-capitalism, that could actually exist outside of capitalism. And there were these authors, these thinkers that came about in the 70s who were like, actually, we really need to stop talking about that because that doesn't exist. And we're not going back to that. It's not possible. And it was this realization of, I think, from like a French Marxist theorist who was like, there is no escape of the system that we're in. It touches every aspect of our life, of our existence, of our world. Capitalism is everywhere. And if we are going to, now this is me thinking on top of the thoughts of Mark Fisher and David Graeber, is like, if we want to exit this system, then we have to look within the system for the things, the tools, and the community and the culture that are anti-capitalist. And I think that if we can embrace those contradictions, we can actually already realize that we have all of the foundation, all of the tools that we need to build a new society within this one. And it doesn't have to be like you have to go outside of it. It doesn't mean you have to go back to washing with washboards because you're worried like, economic, energy constraints, resource constraints. Look, if I'm being totally honest, and this is a very uncomfortable statement for a lot of people, Troy, if you are worried about population growth, trust me that the planet will take care of that. We will lose billions of people if that is what it comes to because of climate change, because of resource overuse. And our population will eventually come in line with whatever our resources are, like whatever that capacity is. So as horrible as that sounds, because that means lots of people dying, horrible deaths, probably, the reality is that nature will take care of that. That is just biology, and that's the reality. So let's just stop worrying about that, and let's just start building the society that we want for the people who will be there, because I don't know if it'll be me or you, but somebody will be there. So let's build it for them. Let's make it sustainable, that the population resource capacity will figure itself out. That's just biology. It's just evolution. It's going to do it on its own. So let's just look for those tools. Let's look for those anti-capitalist tools. And I do think that Bitcoin is part of that. It is partly anti-capitalist. It is also capitalist in some ways, but it comes out of the internet, which to me has very strong, at the fundamental level, very strong anti-capitalist signatures or ways of operating. So I have completely gone off on a tangent, but like the point is, tools in the hands of the right people, we can do good things, and we shouldn't give up. Let's not be doomers. Nature will heal itself too.
So, well, you brought up one of the points that was on my question list, that a lot of Bitcoiners will just turn the pod off at this point or not start it when they hear Bitcoin is anti-capitalist. I'm still, like, I first really started learning about what Bitcoin is in early 2021. I feel like I've just come to a place where I can start digging in deeper and learning more about it. It's kind of like those bell curve of, like, you think you know what something is, or like super simple, and then you like overthink everything, and then you come back down. And for me, it's always that, and it's a frustrating gray area. It's like Bitcoin is a new paradigm, and I really don't know what the future holds. But there's so many little elements in it that people can reflect and see themselves or their community in it, because it's this permissionless tool. So you saying Bitcoin is a little bit capitalist and a little bit anti-capitalist, I completely agree. And it's kind of like, it's capitalist in that it is from within the system, or a solution of code base of, it's very ingrained even at this point in Wall Street, in the way that the wealthy will store their wealth and store a value. It is very, well, let me ask you, because I know that I've read a bit, you've read even more. When you say Bitcoin is anti-capitalist, what's the TLDR on that for those? Because there's a huge contingency on the left that is really, I think, a little too obsessed with hating the rich sucked, but then not wanting solutions for, okay, that's fine, but like, what about the 99% then? Like, getting back to, okay, we're angry, what now? Like, what is the actual solution here? So when you say Bitcoin is anti-capitalist, what do you mean by that?
So one, like, a lot of people don't like Bitcoin because, whatever Wall Street touches, right? It's got to be bad.
Sure.
I don't like Wall Street.
BlackRock was not great for the left in that regard.
Yeah. So, but what makes Bitcoin anti-capitalist is that, first of all, it exists because of the internet. The internet is foundationally anti-capitalist. It is a free and open source network, right? It was essentially, built by scientists, physicists to share data, and then it was open to be commercialized. But the communities that were built within the internet were very anarchistic, and the ability to create software, the way that this developed, took a couple of different routes, right? You could pay for software, build these software companies, and many software companies grew out of this in the 70s and 80s into Microsoft, Apple, Intel, IBM, right? And we got Windows and Mac, the Mac operating system. I don't know what it's called then, Mac OS. And then we had Linux and Unix, FreeBSD. It was free, open source. Anybody can work on this. Anybody can develop on this. We find consensus amongst us as developers deciding what this software should be. And this has been a core feature of the internet. That is not capitalism. I'm sorry, but there's nothing capitalistic about that. Nobody is working for a profit when they work on Linux. I run a distribution of Linux on my laptop called Arch. I don't pay for it. I can make a donation if I want to developers, but I don't pay for it. But there are so many people who are so committed to the idea, to the philosophy behind this particular operating system, that it is regularly updated. They're serious about it, and they build a great operating system as far as I'm concerned. So that is, on the one hand, you have these super capitalist corporations. And then on the other, you have this fantastic alternative, which is honestly better than Windows. I like Linux a lot better than Windows. Windows has all sorts of problems and has historically had tons of security risks, easy to hack, and it's just, but it's a nightmare. But it's easy to use. So and then they get all these deals, and that's also using the state. That's a whole other thing of capitalism. So that's very anti-capitalist. And so Bitcoin comes out of that. Bitcoin is free and open source software. Anybody can develop on the core software or create their own. We have competing node software. I mean, people may not realize that, but we do have competing node software. I mean, the competition is, not a lot of people are, developing on it, but it does exist. We have competing software for running mining pools. And I think that's also very fascinating. Yeah, there are monetary incentives in running them, but we do have competing software there. That is interesting, like the Ocean Pool trying to be more decentralized and empowering the miners to be able to create their own templates. And I think that's very, very fascinating, because that's an attack on centralization, but also an attack on monopoly, which I think is also a core feature often in capitalism, in order to be able to maintain profits and avoid, because when you have a competitive market, the price of that product comes down. So if you really want to maintain your profits, you want to monopolize it. So I think that is a core feature of capitalism. So it's very interesting that there is this really strong motivation towards competitive markets in Bitcoin as much as possible, because it also secures the network, right? So that's really important. So I think that's very interesting. So, and then of course, anybody has a vote in Bitcoin. You vote with your node. What software am I going to run? Do I agree with this, this change? If I don't, I'm not going to upgrade my software. I voted. I said no. And that's like the fundamental thing. And then you can get into like economic nodes and what node matters more, which node has more weight. But, at the fundamental level, anyone has a say, and anyone can decide the future, at least be part of that ability to decide the future of the network through a certain amount of consensus. That is not capitalist at all, right? That's not even how corporations function. Corporations are very top-down, authoritarian. And a lot of people, it really surprises me that they want freedom in their everyday life, but they have no problem with the authoritarian aspect of the corporation, which is run by a small set of leaders. You have your CEO at the top, and it's this very top down, and you've got the management, and then you've got the employees, and the employees have no say really in the business operation. The only alternative you have to that is worker cooperatives. And worker cooperatives are generally considered more of a socialist idea because they're democratic. So I think that there are a lot of elements of Bitcoin that make it anti-capitalist. And then the final one is this idea of property rights. I think property rights in Bitcoin are very different from what we think of property rights in our everyday life, because the internet itself is a massive contradiction of property rights. Corporations, since they realized that people could download and copy their music or books or movies, have been trying to clamp down and reinforce property rights. They, in like the early 2000s, they were even suing like 12-year-olds, right, for downloading a movie. Or music off of Napster. Right? It was ridiculous. But, they lost in the end. What they had to do was provide a better product, something that you would pay for. So then you started getting these subscription services like Netflix. And then YouTube got monetized, but that's a little bit different because they're selling your data and selling ads. But torrents still exist. People still download movies, still download music, still download books for free. That is still there. So property rights on the internet are mostly a joke because everything is digitized, 0 and 1s, and it's very easy to Control-C, copy that, paste it somewhere else. I can make an exact copy of anything I want that is online. how does Bitcoin get around that so that you can have ownership of a piece of a UTXO, which is just, some piece of Bitcoin, like the foundational, under the hood, like there's nothing that says Bitcoin. It's just, these transactions, and you have a transaction, you have an ownership of a transaction, but everybody actually has a copy of your transaction on their software, on their node, their Bitcoin node. I have copies of all your transactions, Trey. I have copies of every single transaction all the way to the very first ones that Satoshi made on my computer. How is that property in the sense of what we understand property? There's not scarcity in those transactions. We all own copies of it. The only thing that is different is that I have a key that gives me access to be able to do something with that transaction on the network. But that only works if we all opt in to the network. If I refuse to participate in this network, you cannot send me that UTXO. So there is no universal aspect to that property either. If Bitcoin disappears, your transactions disappear. If I own a piece of land, that land is really not going anywhere and nobody can make a copy of it. And then there's going to, I can take you to court and, fight you over it. Courts enforce property rights. It's a lot harder with the internet. It's a lot harder with digital technology. So to me, scarcity through property rights, and then really not just to me, but like foundationally, when you look through the criticisms and the understanding of the fundamentals of capitalism, scarcity and property rights are essential components. So if you're targeting that and you're changing what that means, you are doing something that is not capitalism. You're doing something else. And that is the point that I really want people to understand, because there's so, a lot of the pushback I get is just so entrenched in these stale ideas that are so narrow-minded, and there's this refusal to look outside of this one worldview. And I think that is really unfortunate, because if people could start thinking a little bit differently about these aspects, they would start to see, okay, this is actually different. And this is not exactly capitalism, even though it has the veneer of it, and Wall Street can definitely create ETFs and people can trade it and speculate. That's certainly capitalistic, but the core features are not really capitalistic. And that means that it will allow us an opportunity to do things that are not capitalistic and maybe build a society that is very different. So yeah, that's my argument for why it's anti-capitalist in a lot of ways, and a lot of people get triggered when I say that.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now. Well, I think I get frustrated. And one of the reasons, even just as I've said, moving on and wanted to explore other things in the Bitcoin ecosystem is like you said, like stale arguments, like Bitcoin, the internet, digital reality, just our digital lives, like intersecting cyberspace, all of this. It's even, there needs to be more like political philosophy and kind of worldviews of like how Bitcoin gets shaped, that like books and literature that just isn't out there yet. And I'd be interested to read those things, maybe contribute a little bit, but there's academics. I think there's such rich research that still has yet to happen about Bitcoin, because yes, I will say this all day, Bitcoin is for everyone, will be used by everyone, is an open source protocol, but there's also this group that a lot of the things that we're talking about, you're talking about here, using Bitcoin as this tool, seeing the properties of Bitcoin intertwined with what the internet was and is in a lot of ways, and the battles for that are very anti-capitalist, that are very this new different thing. And so why do you think too many on the left continue to ignore that? Because Bitcoin in the wider world, mostly for people, they're just like, that Bitcoin crypto thing, that's not really for me, right? Let's say in like the US context, or maybe around the world too, sometimes it's associated with a scam or a crypto thing, or I don't really know about that. Or then maybe it's associated with, that's a right-wing libertarian thing, or academics will really kind of, sometimes academics, but more sometimes media, whether it's through environmental stuff, Trump, whoever is saying they like Bitcoin. On the surface, I can see why Bitcoin might be a little more associated with libertarian stuff, but just even having this conversation here is the reminder that Bitcoin carries with it the ethos of decentralization and the internet, which is very anarchist, very left libertarian, very anti-capitalist, very libertarian socialist, all of these things, right? Like, and again, you can reject that and be like, that's not me, and still use Bitcoin. But I'm just saying the ethos and design, right? It's questioning private property in the way that we know. It's questioning all these things. So why is it been so wrapped up in libertarian, or kind of viewed as that thing from a lot of the world? Like, why do sometimes I think that's a silly question, but just after this conversation, I'm like, why haven't more folks on the left, or kind of from that philosophical camp, joined Team Bitcoin here?
Well, I think part of the problem is that there were a lot of libertarians who found Bitcoin first. And they did because Hayek talked a lot about this stuff. So there was one strain of economics that actually was very concerned about money and centralized power over money. And it wasn't on the left. Those people were not concerned with that. So there was, and there is still, this disadvantage. And I think that, I think it's really interesting too, that.
Well, so what you're saying, it's kind of like there's the economic camp that libertarians coming to Bitcoin, or that kind of libertarian right, the those kind of things that you were just mentioning, Hayek and others, that of self-described libertarians today in the US are more comfortable economically with seeing that, or are contrary to central government control, or whatever they call handouts, things like that. And then there's the social implications that seem to be more like left in some ways, in terms of what you're describing with the protocol, with the internet, things like that. That's almost seems like where there's the split, and why the economic libertarians are like, oh yeah, we've seen this before. This is like the prophecy foretold, and it's Bitcoin.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think about, like all the reasons why this has happened this way. As I said before, right, the libertarians did find Bitcoin first, mostly because they were Austrian economic fans. And I think that's why the Austrian economics really dominates the narrative in Bitcoin, because they just kept, orange pilling their friends who were libertarians. And it was kind of written in their Bible that you needed this separation of state and money. Whereas on the left, and for progressives, they really were not thinking of a separation of state and money. And there's a bigger push for progressives to try to put pressure on the state to enact legislation that will benefit people. So there is a little bit more of a, like, let's go for the top to benefit everybody. Whereas for libertarians, it's like they're more anarchist, like, because a lot of their ideas are also framed through the original left libertarian anarchists. So they are very skeptical of the state. And I think it's really interesting and fascinating, actually, that there's this still such a strong narrative on the left to want to push the state and to work within the state framework. I think that's a very predominant narrative or tactic for the left, and for progressives especially. Anarchists obviously are a little bit different, but the thing that I think is really interesting is that in the 70s, there was a massive reflection on the failures of the left and these worker movements and socialism, communism, realizing that there was a lot of authoritarianism that came out of that, and that this really was not working. This wasn't taking us into this next stage. It was still like a kind of state capitalism where you had, but the control was by a single party, by the Workers' Party. And there was a rethinking of the left and of socialism and to make it more democratic. And it's really interesting to me that this has not really become the dominant narrative on the left. There still seems to be a lot of people who want to be attracted to these much more authoritarian aspects of communism, like reading Trotsky or Lenin, which I'm sure will give you some interesting insight historically, but ultimately led us in a direction that really wasn't that great. And so I think there's this struggle, there's a problem in left thinking that is missing a whole other context, I think. For some reason, people just think, oh, all I have to do is read the first edition, the first part one of Capital, and I am now a communist. I am a Marxist. But, that's only like touching on the very basics. And then there's a whole other range of thought that happened in the 60s and the 70s that I think are so important, like this idea, like the new left and the situationists and all that, like, is so missing on the left. And I don't know exactly why, because I think that if people really engage with that, they might think differently. I don't know that it would bring them to Bitcoin, but it might make them think a little bit differently about their relationship with the state. I also think that the Democratic Party has done a very good job of co-opting left movements, concluding Bernie Sanders. And I think this being your last show, I would love to kind of get into the politics stuff of this.
Yeah. You've been reading my mind, because I was going to say, the whole ethos of this show, and really it's not, it is the end of me hosting this particular show. This is far from the end of folks from the left being involved with Bitcoin, talking about Bitcoin, writing about Bitcoin, going on shows and talking about it. If someone else continues to host the show, or different iterations of folks from the left doing content in Bitcoin, I think that's just beginning the past few years. And this is one of many. And it was always about what are the values and things from the left that are natural fits to Bitcoin, to combat the narratives that Bitcoin is only this one thing for this one group, but also in what ways are we pushing back against modern progressives, modern left, modern environmentalist groups, Greenpeace USA, those things, right? How are we doing that? So I would absolutely love to go into this part with you.
Yeah, so the left is very good at being co-opted by the Democratic Party in the U.S. And we're talking about progressives, and we're really focused on the U.S. and U.S. politics when we talk about this. And it amazes me, even down to Bernie Sanders' campaign. Bernie was the first to get as far as he did to really challenge the hegemony of the Democratic Party. But now you see Bernie, and he was at the DNC at the convention, and they gave him talk time. And he did his spiel, his usual spiel, the oligarchy, whatever, we got to fight this. But what I saw was a shell, or an image of a movement that no longer exists, that has been absorbed into the political machine of the Democratic Party, and is really just an object to present, to say, oh yeah, we represent this line too. But if they're allowing him to say this at the convention, it basically means that it is no longer a threat. Because if you can allow AOC to come out on stage so that she promises to say that Kamala Harris is working tirelessly against to end the war in Gaza, to end the genocide in Gaza, but you will not let Ilhan Omar, or you will not let the Palestinian Americans who are diehard Democrats come on stage to at least say something humane about the Palestinian people who are suffering in Gaza. Then you know that the people who they let on stage are not a threat to the party line and to the donors behind the Democratic Party. So Bernie is completely neutered. They took him out. He knows that. He said it recently on a podcast that they took him out. Obama was part of that. So what I have seen is a shift in the political views of what you would call the progressive movement from the early 2000s, from the Iraq War through to today. If you recall, I don't know if you recall, we were both probably in school still, I was, but I was also aware that I was old enough. Nancy Pelosi was opposed to the Iraq War. Bernie Sanders was opposed. I mean, Nancy Pelosi came around later, but...
Yeah, so when 9/11 happened, I was in fourth grade. I remember that. And then a lot of those legislative debates happened 2002, 2003. So, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of this was happening. Okay. Bernie was opposed to the war, right? There was this opposition to the neoconservatives, the Bush illegal war. We move in, then Obama becomes president, runs on this campaign of hope, whatever that means, and does some of the worst actions out there in terms of drone warfare, illegal killings of people, of Americans overseas with drones, and doesn't end any wars. Starts probably, if I recall, starts wars. Syria happened under Obama. But then at the same time, you still had this dissenting movement within the left and progressives against the Democratic Party, and within the Democratic Party that I think starts around the time that Obama becomes president. I think there was a certain acknowledgement and disillusionment with Obama, even though he does get reelected. And I think for obvious reasons why he gets reelected. But there is still a very powerful dissent there. And there's concerns about privacy, and there's concerns around surveillance. All this time, Edward Snowden happened during this time. Julian Assange was at his peak during this time with WikiLeaks. And we were learning all the stuff about what the government was doing in our name without our permission, killing people, overthrowing governments, coups, all the cable leaks, the horrible stuff that Chelsea Manning leaked during the Iraq War. These things really had a huge impact on people, especially on the left, especially progressives. And they were fighting for this. They were fighting for internet freedom. They were fighting for all of this stuff that is aligned with where we are now. Bernie obviously comes out 2015, really riding this moment, this new consciousness awareness raising that happened during Occupy. Progressives were the ones who convinced Bernie to run. I know the people who brought him to Los Angeles and convinced him to run for office. I know them. They're progressives. They're on the left. And Bernie ran, and he brought this to the pinnacle moment and brought another level of consciousness raising amongst young people, especially, but not just young people. He was able to reach people in the rural areas, especially, who are some of the most disenfranchised people in the country, and bring them back into the political landscape. And then he didn't do well, the Hillary machine, whatever, the last moments of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange before he's arrested, and they were blaming him for interference with the DNC and Russia. And, that's really where things start changing, I think. Because something that I also noticed was that for a long time, Russia was not our enemy. And then all of a sudden, I started hearing this shift in narrative in the media that Russia is our enemy. And I thought, what? This is strange, because I remember like a year ago or two that Russia was an ally. Like, to a certain degree, we were not really that strongly opposed to Russia. But it's this slow shift that started really peaking around this 2016 election with Russiagate and all that stuff. And I think it was in that moment that there was starting to be a shift in the understanding of the world from the progressives and from the lefts and from liberals that was co-opted and brought people back in alignment on the left with the government, rather than being suspicious of the government. And probably going back to the 60s, with the CIA and all the coups that were happening then, people on the left were very suspicious of the CIA and the FBI. I mean, the FBI did all sorts of raids on really powerful left movements. And suddenly, with Russia, I think people were brought back in line through fear to be in support of the FBI, be in support of the CIA, be in support of the political powers, political elites, not to question them. And I think all of this really consolidated through 2016, through 2020, even though 2020 was really Bernie's biggest moment where he got very close. But he was still defeated because the power of the DNC came together, consolidated, Obama came in, and they crushed him. And I think that is the moment where the progressive movement and all of the values of the progressive movement that we understand, that we talk about today, of like Occupy and all of that, was crushed and no longer exists in the consciousness of the left, of progressives. Progressives live in fear, I think, now. Liberals, Democrats live in fear. Fear of what can happen if they don't elect Kamala Harris, if they don't elect Joe Biden, or whoever the next person the Democratic Party puts out there. Maybe it'll be AOC, because she's fully on board now with the party line, and she's young and diverse, and they love that now, which, great. But, it's a tactic. It's a political tactic. It's not a sincere thing. So I think people are not capable anymore of seeing something like Bitcoin in the way that they might have 10 years ago. If where you and I are now, we're here in 2011 talking about Bitcoin in this same way, I think that things would have been very different. I think that we would be bringing in a lot more people. But I think that these thoughts, this moment of consciousness raising, was destroyed. Not just stopped, but destroyed. In that it no longer exists in the consciousness of people who would consider themselves on the left or liberal or progressive. What exists in the consciousness now is fear, primarily. And some of it is justified. I think a lot of it is not. And people are only acting out of fear. And they are only electing out of fear. Fear that if they don't elect Kamala Harris, democracy is going to end. Fear that if they don't elect Kamala Harris, Russia is going to take over. Russia is infiltrating the United States or China or whatever, right? So I think we are not able to reach people as easily on a mass scale, because the things that you and I talk about, and the people who are Bitcoiners who identify in what we identify with, we're the ones that I think didn't take the poison pill in a way. Like, we didn't get the brainwashing and propaganda didn't work on us. And I think, honestly, that is one of the problems, is that we can see through what is going on to a certain degree, and it doesn't affect us in the same way. So we're not moving in the same direction as everybody else around us who we are aligned with, politically, or should be aligned with politically, because they've been absorbed through propaganda into a narrative that is being pushed on them from the Democratic Party and from their corporate backers and whoever else with lots of money has their own agenda. The military-industrial complex. I mean, look at the endorsements that Harris has gotten from neoconservatives, Dick Cheney. I mean,
I saw that and I'm like, I probably put it on Nostr because only individually I post on Nostr. I literally use like Nostr and then like Instagram for like my normie friends. But I was like, the Democrats are praising that war criminal Dick Cheney is endorsing Kamala Harris. What the literal fuck?
The guy shot somebody in the face.
Yeah, I mean, just a joke of a person, but also, like if folks hate George Bush, Dick Cheney was the puppet master of, like, gosh, there's a whole other podcast episode or conversation. But I think what folks need to realize is that the Democrats and the left are so fearful of someone who has a team around him like Donald Trump that views constitutionally the executive office as like you can do whatever you want as president and trying to use that in different ways, like philosophically. Dick Cheney was the mastermind of that. In terms of his philosophy of the Constitution, saying the executive branch is the strongest branch. There was no balance with what Dick Cheney brought to the office. So now that Dick Cheney's this older guy, this sweet grandfather of America, endorses Kamala Harris, like that is absolutely insane to me, to anyone that's read even 10 minutes of anything about Dick Cheney in those years. And I think what you said is so wise. I hope people pause it and rewind just in terms of maybe our challenge, your challenge, my challenge in different ways, many others, of talking to people about Bitcoin from the left. Because there is the thought that a lot of folks, like the Democrats went establishment, the right went MAGA populism. So the Democrats chose establishment. So when you talk about something that is countercultural, anti-establishment, which is Bitcoin, even though people of the establishment can use it, all of these things, right? There's automatically a wall that gets put up saying, red alert, like, let me flag this. This feels off. And it's the way the left has approached Bitcoin from day one in a lot of ways, except for some of us that are like, we're like, what happened to progressives? Like I ask that all the time. And many people ask me that are no longer that or used to be that, like what happened? And I'm like, well, it's complicated. And it's a lot of the things that you just said. And I'm wondering your thoughts on, does progressive values and left and whatever wake up again about some of these things with an election of Donald Trump? Or is it just dead? And because sometimes I'm like, the left might care about Bitcoin and resistance when, their enemy. Like I'm kind of in between. I don't think the world will end if Donald Trump gets elected president. I don't think we'll become a communist whatever if Kamala Harris gets elected, right? Like the two extremes you see online. But do you think people will wake up more if someone else is in charge? I wouldn't be advocating for that personally, my Bitcoin stuff aside. But what are your thoughts on that in terms of where progressivism is, the left? Because I do agree. I think it's a spectacle at this point. I think they let Ilhan Omar talk at certain moments, or certain people talk, or Cori Bush, who lost her election. And again, I'm not a bunch of these people individually. I don't actually know that well because I've pulled back quite a bit from politics at that level, which people may be surprised by, but so I don't know all too well. But again, it's kind of a spectacle. They let progressives talking about the working class and working wages, but still all within the confines and the system of the party leadership or the government or whatever. That's very different than progressive values I kind of started to grow into in high school and college around 2010, like you were mentioning. So where do you see the progressive movement and left movement going from here in the US?
Yeah. So really quick. So I think Bernie Sanders really failed to carry the progressive movement forward. And I do blame him for that because I worked on his campaign both times, in 2016 and 2020, and even more in 2020. I was a victory captain, so I was leading other
There's
volunteers.
A lot of people in Bitcoin from the left that people don't know already that were literally victory captains, like a huge statistically
really
significant
a lot of us,
number.
I had no idea.
We were talking about Brian and Michelle earlier. I don't know that Logan was, but I know Logan's written about Bitcoin and Bernie. Nicole, so many others were involved with whether it's volunteering or whether to that level, that are from the left in Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw the collapse of the campaign firsthand because I was here in Georgia and the COVID and everything was happening, I had just taken a group out to South Carolina to do get out the vote door knocking, and had my little dog with me. And it was great. Of course, we lost South Carolina, and that was terrible. But then we were ramping up here in Georgia, and I was starting to build a relationship with the local office to really start getting more involved on the ground here, running the local campaigns. And then, then Bernie suspends the campaign. And it was just obvious there was this moment. And he really did an amazing job. First, let me just say, he did an amazing job during those early months of COVID with so much uncertainty. And he made the right moves by canceling the get out the vote stuff. And Biden was out there telling people, it's safe, don't worry. And he had all these special musical time hours kind of stuff, like motivational stuff to keep people going. It was really, it was really inspiring and comforting what he was doing. And I think his campaign, if they were going to put their money anywhere, they put it in the right place, which was to make people feel okay about everything that was happening so fast. And it was very scary. But there was this moment where he could have continued to carry the movement forward, and he didn't do it. And the movement needed Bernie as a leader because the movement was built under him. So because he refused to continue to engage with the movement that he had created, the movement dissolved. And I think that is also partly why progressives have completely collapsed. Personally, I don't think that there really is a progressive movement anymore. There is the label. And I know we've talked about, should this even be called the progressive Bitcoiner? Is there even a progressive really anymore beyond the name of it? And I don't know. I mean, I don't really know where progressivism is these days, but I know that it's totally dead, I would say, beyond the name itself. And I think that this concept of progressive has also been absorbed and co-opted into the Democratic Party, into the establishment, like you said, this has become an establishment thing. And it's just like another little thing that gets paraded about, but there's nothing really behind it anymore. So can we change this? What does it take? Would Trump being elected again, would that shake things up? Well, that was Slavoj Žižek's point in 2016 was it might be good for the US and for the left if Trump is elected. I mean, in a way, right, we had tons of protests happen under Trump, and we don't have anywhere of that kind of level of activism under Biden. And I suspect that if Kamala Harris is elected, we will see even less. Unless there is some serious economic reckoning that happens, like what happened with the Great Recession and then Obama coming into office and not really solving the problems, then maybe we might see a new level of consciousness raising. But I don't know. I don't even, I don't know, the problem is there's so much propaganda. There was so much propaganda against Trump when he was in office. And he was a nightmare. I hated him. not like I'm saying I changed my mind. I love Trump. No, I hated him. I thought he was absolutely insane and incompetent. But I did see how equally insane the level of propaganda was against him, especially with all the Russia stuff. So I do worry that the propaganda, people have to somehow first break through that propaganda to then be able to get back in touch with the consciousness raising that had happened before. And until we can get through that propaganda, I don't know, it's so easy for people to say, Russia was using Bitcoin. That's bad. We don't want anything that Russia has been touching, illegal, bad, evil, Russiagate. All sorts of emotions get tied into that. So yeah, it's hard to say, that was Slavoj Žižek's point. And on the one hand, he was kind of right. Like I said, we had tons of protests under Trump. But I don't know. Could be. could maybe another 4 years could maybe shake things up for people on left. Maybe it would weaken the Democratic Party. And I think we need a weaker Democratic Party. I think we need a disillusioned Democratic Party. We need people to lose faith in the Democratic Party, to start being able to think rationally again. And also we need people to break out of just like identity first, like the identity politics stuff. Identity is important. I talk a lot about my own identity as somebody on the spectrum. I'm autistic. And I'm not denying that identity is important, but I think like the weaponization of identity is what I mean. Like identity has been so weaponized and co-opted as well. Like, let's just like repackage the whole neocon, military industrial complex, Wall Street corporate favors behind this young or younger brown skinned person who can kind of talk the language, like moving their body in a certain way. Oh, I listen to Coltrane, what I'm saying? Like, I'm like you, I'm cool. I mean, AOC does this too. Like she starts talking a certain way, even though she like grew up.
AOC is going to be our candidate in 28, isn't she?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. She's ready to be Kamala Harris.
I think the moment that clicked for me with her was when she was in front of like Capitol Hill and the reporters came to her and she was saying, Biden is our candidate. We must support our candidate. And that's a whole other thing about people saying, oh, the Democratic Party wasn't democratic and this and that. And I understand some of those points. They can break that down in another podcast. Like I said, I'm just exhausted and wholly uninterested in a lot of the political comments at this point. This interests me because we're talking about values and a philosophy and a movement of people. Because for me, I was only ever interested in politics or political theory, and I approach things from a social theory background because people-centered movements are really powerful and important in human history. Not like, let me government nerd out on like the Democratic Party or something like that. But that clicked for me with AOC. And back to your point about like Trump being elected, it's kind of like the Democrats responded again by going more establishment, because they were like, well, Trump was a partisan populist, this and that. We can't retaliate with populism. We have to retaliate with, let's, raise the drawbridge on the castle. Let's lock everything in nice and neat. And let's just like, we need to double down on everything about the United States, about the US government, about the facade that your life will change, that inflation will be fixed. You'll have a job that you'll love. You'll have, all of these things, all of these talking points. We need to center back in, and Biden will do that. And then Biden brought in that FDR style of that early progressive, or the tones of that, wanting to be that and this and that. But again, corporate politician for the past 50 years. He was the youngest elected senator in history. In the U.S., and the Democratic Party said, yes, that is our, I don't know, that's our marching order from here on out. So I think it will be interesting. I think, to your point, Mark Stefani, former host, and I talked about this on his episode last week that dropped. He was like, we are comfortable in our comfort in terms of, obviously, I would never advocate and want catastrophe to happen, whether it's for any person or family or community or this country, whatever, but we're comfortable in our comfort. We find different ways to fight on the internet with each other, which is why I've personally taken the decision to step back from that a little bit more than I had been in Bitcoin, which is a very online-centric thing, obviously. Independent thought, all this stuff. Even the people that, propose independent thought are now mega influencers, like, the joke that Tucker Carlson is an independent voice. Like, come on, that's a force to be reckoned with. That's a media empire already, right? So there's, what does independent even mean at this point? What does progressive mean at this point? I think for me too, with this, I want to continue exploring topics like this, but maybe not under this name for myself, because the amount of times I spent battling people, or not battling, just trying to talk about, well, do progressives get what is progressive, this and that? And I'm like, I want to talk about like Bitcoin. I want to talk about like hope of a better world. I want to talk about these themes that we're talking about now, and not spend my time defending a movement that, I don't believe in either. But I remember when progressives were something different. And I've talked with the team a lot about this. Anyone on the show, can we find a new name for, or can we, take progressive and run with it and have it be a new thing? And I think maybe, yeah. I don't know. I kind of flip-flop on that. Sometimes I'm like, it really is dead. And when we talk about Bitcoin and people movements, I'm more interested in not talking about it in political language anymore, even though I'm still from the left in that camp, because I think it distracts people. It turns people off. Like, how many people have been turned off by this show? Maybe, just being honest, I'm not sure, by seeing the label, but the conversation they might be interested in. That's something I wrestle with a lot. And I think something like Bitcoin, something like these movements we've talked about, the Democrats have completely co-opted the progressives that are left in that party, or the progressives that have changed in that party. And it's a huge distraction when we're talking about hope for a better world and this new technology that is Bitcoin. So I don't personally like talking about progressive and Bitcoin in that way anymore. I'm happy that we had this conversation about the historical notion of what progressive was, but I tend to agree with you that the progressive movement from those days is dead. That informed my childhood and going into high school and college, where you formulate a lot of your ideas about who you are and want to be. For me, that was a different age, even though it was only a little over a decade ago. Now, there might be someone else that's very like, I am that Democrat, I am that view of progressive, and want to talk about Bitcoin in that way to those people. That's not me. That's not a lot of us that find ourselves in Bitcoin, because we find ourselves in Bitcoin because we're not comfortable with what we've seen from the Democratic Party. And I think that's where we're at with this show today, in this conversation. Yeah, it's been interesting though.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that Mark, look, I was there. I would say I was there when Mark created the Progressive Bitcoiner.
I was in the room.
I was literally in the room. It was in the DM on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I actually, I think it's really funny.
And this was like 22, right? Like around 2022. Yeah. Just for people to know. Yep.
Yeah, around 2022. I think it's really funny. I mean, although I think we started talking in that group like the end of 2021. But I think it's really funny that we felt that we needed something that said progressive in it at the time, because there is an entire progressive media out there, and few really say progressive in their name, like talk shows and a lot of the progressive talk shows. We just know it by topic. Like, oh yeah, that host. I'm politically aligned with that host.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Or that particular outlet. So I think it's really, it says a lot about where things were at that time in Bitcoin, and especially in the Bitcoin community or online community, that we actually felt like we had to make a statement like, we are progressives, we are here. This is not all right-wing libertarianism. Yeah. And I do wonder if that's even necessary anymore. I know you were saying like how many people were turned off about it, but I also think, there are a lot of people that were turned on by the name.
Oh, I agree. I should be fair with that. Yeah. And I think my fear, some people are turned on to it, but also, again, me personal conviction is like, I don't want people to double down on identity politics. Like, I came in and did this and was even interested before this, or I went on Peter's show or even connected with Mark after the fact when this show stopped about maybe taking it over, because I was like, we still have a little bit more work to do to cement that it's okay to not be a conservative, stake-eating, religious Bitcoin or something like that, right? That was, like you said, that was a lot of the marketing behind Bitcoin, because the association was so strongly linked from 2018, 19 onward, especially over the COVID years, to Bitcoin being a right-leaning libertarian thing online, and combating that. That's the reason for it. I personally feel that this does not need to exist anymore. Now, if someone wants to carry it forward and we're having possibly some conversations, that's great. But there's enough material for those of us on the left to rise above and not need this name that what even does it mean anymore when we're trying to usher in this new paradigm. While I think it's interesting, possibly some on the right are getting more political. And by that, I mean doubling down with Trump or with other things. I think those of us on the left, I'd like to continue to see us going in a we're just opposed to authoritarianism, and we have this new Bitcoin thing that's pretty cool for people. So anyway.
Yeah, I think we're in a really different time now. Mm-hmm. I don't, progressive, that concept of the progressive, I think is dead. But I don't think that our ideas, the fundamental ideas, are dead. I think they're still there. They exist in us. We're still working on them. And other people are too, in different ways, not necessarily through Bitcoin. But I think we should keep that in mind. And I think that there is a really strange shift happening right now politically in the minds of a lot of people. And I don't really know where it's going, but I do think that what is the most interesting that is happening amongst the people who are Trump supporters, more than the people who are supporters of the Democratic Party. And I say specifically Trump, because I see Trump as
like Trump,
separate,
not Republicans.
Yes, separate from the Republican Party. I think the Republican Party has just said, like, look, he's the only person who's going to get us into power. I don't really see Trump align with much of the Republicans who are in power. Mm-hmm. I see the Democrats with Kamala Harris as one unified message. Kamala Harris is aligned with the party message. Every one of them are. AOC, whatever. So that's not very interesting, because their base is still, they're targeting their base in the same way. It's mostly like well-to-do people who are going to be happy, I think, with whatever the Democratic Party is saying. It's not going to change anything for them. But it's those who are truly working class who really felt alienated by the Democratic Party that used to be the party of the working class, or claimed to be, and is no longer. They're the ones who are sort of, trying to find something that they can get behind. And it's very obvious that Trump filled that void that Bernie Sanders, like, he was competing with Bernie for these voices. And of course, the Democratic Party killed Bernie Sanders' movement. So they have no other place to go other than Trump or a third party. RFK Jr. really connected with a lot of those people as well, but then he came in and has endorsed Trump. And I think that is also politically very fascinating, because he says a lot of things that traditionally were progressive concepts. And I know he pushes buttons on a lot of people and triggers a lot of people, and they refuse to listen to him. But if you can get past that particular layer, and you listen to what he says about big pharma and stuff, those were all things that progressives used to fight for. We used to care about big pharma. We used to talk about that stuff. So here's RFK Jr. endorsing Trump and saying, oh yeah, make America healthy again. Regenerative farming. Stop chemicals like Monsanto. Progressives used to care about that. Cancer caused by glyphosites or whatever. Progressives used to care about that. He's talking about, dealing with the corruption that is in these agencies like the FDA, getting the corporate lobbyists and getting the corporations out of these governing bodies. Same thing we were saying before. Also, we're saying that about Wall Street. Get Wall Street out of the Federal Reserve, out of our, dealings with the Treasury, economics, right? We used to say those things. Now we're hearing this guy saying that, endorsing Trump, and Trump's embracing it. And I just think that we're really missing something if we can get past our initial distaste and triggers when we see Trump and we see some of these people. If we can get past that and start really thinking about what is happening there, we are about to miss something huge. And this is going to shape the political landscape for probably the next decade, especially if Trump wins. And I don't know what comes out of that. I don't know what it means. I don't know where it goes. But this is really, truly where the political shifts are happening. And it's happening with in the Trump campaign, because that's where that he's attracting these working class people, and he's attracting them across color lines, I guess you could say. Like, it's not just white working class, he's attracting Black working class, he's attracting Hispanic working class. I live in Atlanta. There's a lot of Black working class in Atlanta. There's also a lot of Black elite in Atlanta. I know where the Black working class live, and I know where the elites live. Night and day. My Uber drivers are Black working class. They're Trump supporters. So think about that, right? So progressives, our ideas are still there. We still work on them with Bitcoin, but the world is changing, and there's something happening. So where this takes us, and where it takes us in terms of the people we reach, I think that we're going to find ourselves in a very difficult spot. I don't know if we're going to reach the people that we were originally trying to reach, because I think we might become their enemies at some point if we're not careful. So just food for thought. Keep an eye.
No,
there's shifts happening right now.
Yeah, and I think this is the exact conversation we needed to have for this point in the show, for this final episode, for a transition before an election year, all of these things. There were many people that, I got into Bitcoin because like you said, I was a previous, or as you were talking about, I was also a previous Bernie supporter. I was really disheartened and disillusioned and just kind of done and separate with the Democratic Party and really frustrated. So I was ripe for understanding this newer and different thing that took some of the ideals of Occupy and move forward. I was like, sweet. So I got it pretty quick in that regard. There wasn't a lot of things that I was like were stumbling blocks for me. The biggest one initially was like, that's a crypto bro thing. Like, what? But it took me just a little bit of time to see. There wasn't the other stumbling blocks. I didn't need a reason for why, or why the energy use for these things. Because of that, I know there are a lot of other people like us that are lying in the background, that are historically left, historically Democrats, not just like the working class that are now voting Trump, or they'll vote Biden, or they'll vote Obama. I mean like true previous Democrats that are like, I don't know. I mean, there's a shit ton of Democrats and left that are really pissed about Gaza, right? That are politically homeless. Even before, it's like every election cycle, the Democratic Party continues to make certain people feel politically homeless. And again, for those that are listening, Margot and I, we both come from this left background. Like Margot, you've talked about your father before. You've talked I will criticize the right all day, but I'm not from that background. We're kind of having a conversation about where our background or group goes, the progressive Bitcoiner, all of these things. There's a lot on the right that is just a clown show of loving an authoritarian in Trump, in my mind. But again, we're here to talk about the party that has had the facade of the ruling party for quite a while, the facade of helping people. I mean, talk about her too much on the show, but like Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts, we have one of the highest income inequality in Massachusetts, in addition to the Bitcoin stuff, but also just as a candidate. I'm like, you've done nothing effectively for the working class because you are pretending the problem exists here, but it doesn't exist there. That's the cherry on top. You're not getting to the base. Bernie and others, again, shouldn't put too much faith in just an individual, but the conversations we were having, like today, a good example is like for Big Pharma. They'll say, oh, we capped cost on drugs of like 5 different drugs. And, capping costs, that's what we can have that whole conversation about. Is that effective? Is that good or not? They used to talk about like not eradicating Big Pharma, but just the conversation, the tone of like how evil and horrible this is and it doesn't have to live this way. Nowadays, it's like we'd reduce drugs for 5 different drugs. You're welcome. That's like the neutering of progressive values in the Democratic Party. And I'm sure maybe conservatives feel that some values on their end that I wouldn't agree with are neutered under a Trump or under something else, right? I know evangelicals feel super betrayed by Trump in a lot of ways, like Trump saying he won't do national abortion bans or something when they're really hoping that he will, and maybe he does or doesn't. But it's a whole other thing Bitcoiners should be aware of when this man promises something, even though I'm thrilled if he doesn't go through on those things as a progressive. But yeah, I think what we're seeing is the rise of people that are not affiliated with political parties, the rise of people understanding we don't need this two-party system in the way that we have. People pausing and thinking for themselves, hopefully. There's like an extreme. There's an increase of people pausing and thinking for themselves, and there's an increase in people not doing that. It's like those two extremes. And that's why it's so interesting. It's almost like the political parties and the policies you're seeing with Trump being literally all over the place. Like you can't pin him down on an ideology in a lot of ways. It's almost like a decentralized thought of, well, RFK is saying this, Trump is saying this. It's all over the place. And it's very unpredictable, but I do not see like this two-party system in the way it is continuing on. I don't even see the federal government continuing on the way that it is established. I think that's why a lot of us find ourselves in Bitcoin. So the point of this episode and the point of history we're in is it's very uncertain times ahead. There's a lot of reason for hope as well, which we'll continue to cover and other people will continue to cover. But yeah, hopefully a lot of food for thought for people that listen to this episode and whether they agree or disagree. And I say that too much on the show. I've gotten comments before that like, you don't need to apologize too much or this and that. Because originally, that was the other point I was going to say is I kind of came in and people wanted me to be like the Democratic Bitcoiner. Like they're like, we really want you to be that guy. I tried to work with the Crypto for Harris people. Didn't really pan out. And back to what you said about we could be people's enemies here. Like we are anti-establishment people, like progressives previously, trying to work with whether it's Crypto for Harris or other. And I respect some of the people that I've gotten to know from that, but I tried to amplify Bitcoiners through that movement. I tried to amplify proof of work, self-custody, and stop jailing developers. Those are my big three things that I kept trying to pitch to that group. Nope. We got to go to where the establishment is at and make Bitcoin work for them. Sorry, that's not what I'm here for. So if people want to know, I'm not affiliated with that group at all. I never was, but I was kind of having conversations and hoping to amplify Bitcoin so it wouldn't just be seen as a Trump party platform and yada, yada. I did that for a few weeks. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Similar to my involvement with this podcast, I think too many people have associated our movement and group with trying to get Democrats where they are on board. And I'm like, I think you have to come to a place where you are unsettled with the way government is and where things are working. Then you can open your mind to what we're talking about. So it's less about evangelizing to those people in that group, but being here for when those people are ready to look to other options, other alternatives, other ways of thinking about things. That's the ethos of, I think, this show and a lot of us that have come through the show and continue on. Maybe there are others that will do the Democrat Bitcoin thing. I don't know. It's not as interesting to me. Yeah, I kind of see, not secretly. I hope not as well. I think we need to talk about Bitcoin in a way that's different from Republican Bitcoin, conservative Bitcoin, Democrat Bitcoin, progressive Bitcoin, and be like, it is a new thing. I've become more comfortable, and I've talked regularly with ABC, as we call them, but especially Bradley, about, can we say that Bitcoiners are anti-authoritarian? Is that our common thread? I'd like to think and hope so, because there's two things. There's Bitcoiners and the ethos that is, and then there's Bitcoin, the protocol, which anybody can use, whatever. Governments can use, Kamala Harris can use, whoever. But Bitcoiners, are we anti-authoritarian? And what does that mean? Because there's the anti-authoritarian left, there's the anti-authoritarian right. And sometimes there's the anti-authoritarian against corporations and anti-authoritarian against central government. And where can we find commonality with that? Personally, I think that's where Bitcoiners can find commonality. Even those that are from all political stripes and backgrounds, is charting a new path forward and fighting against authoritarians wherever they rise up. Some people don't, I can't talk about that in certain rooms. And I'm like, okay, then that's not me. And I understand that. We never were trying to appeal to politicians in the show. We were always trying to appeal to voters to then write. And a lot of our listeners, our strong, mighty listener base, do email their senators and congressmen, do phone and write letters to Elizabeth Warren. I'd like to think maybe at some point that has had a tiny bit of an impact, which would be cool. That was always the hope and philosophy for this show, and will continue to be. And whatever those of us who've kind of come and meandered into Bitcoin in this way is to have an impact, not to become, you're talking about AOC, maybe not to become that. And I do fear that some Bitcoiners that are aligning with Trump, you're doing what we've been talking about, and we are very weary of that with AOC becoming a establishment. Like, you're going to Trump and you're trying to Trojan horse a politician, or that's the thought, but then it's just going to become the US government as synonymous with Bitcoin. That just feels weird. And I know I'm oversimplifying it, so people don't blow up my DMs too much here. Respect and love to you all. Margot, you bring up a lot of good points.
You will not succeed with your tactics if you think all it takes is orange pilling a politician. I just don't. That has never worked, and it will not work. So, good luck. Trump launched his DeFi thing, so I don't care that he showed up at PubKey. I don't think he fundamentally cares either about it. It's just not that important. And I mean, it wasn't discussed in any of the debates, and it's not going to, because it's not really an issue. It's not really a true issue.
Yeah.
It's not what people are going to go and vote about. I mean, some people will. Obviously, Bitcoin people or crypto people will make decisions based off of that probably, but most people won't. I think it's only really like the companies that have something at stake, I think, that really care about the election.
Yeah.
So like Bitcoin mining companies. But beyond that, the government is not going to give us what we want as users of Bitcoin. It is not possible. That is not their goal. Governments want to surveil and control people as much as possible. And what they want is to co-opt Bitcoin too and make it something they can control. They don't understand that they can't do that. So, it's like, if you want to throw away your money on a politician, go ahead. But I don't think that you're going to get what you really want other than to run your business. And if that's all you want, well, then just say it. Just say, I'm doing this for my business. And some of the Bitcoin miners have said that. And fine, be honest about it. I think that's good. Honesty is good. But I agree. I'm glad that you didn't become the Democrat voice of Bitcoin, because I think that would really have limited you in what you could have done. And you would have just been like a Sam Cedar of Bitcoin, which would probably have been very boring. Yeah. And I'm not particularly interested in that. And so I appreciate that you are really pushing yourself to find other voices and try to take a broader view on what this show means. What is progressive Bitcoiner? Like, what does that mean? What does it represent? What are the ideas? And I think that you did a really good job of trying to represent the ideas and the philosophies. Even though, like, as a movement, the progressive may not exist anymore, but the ideas themselves can continue to exist and to flourish. And I think you did a very nice job trying to do that. So I'm really glad that you didn't give in to that pressure, because this would not have been a very interesting show. It would have just really been trying to brand Bitcoin in a way that is just, at least to me, has no appeal. And I think it's just politicizing Bitcoin. And I really don't want to see Bitcoin as a partisan tool, as a partisan football, which is what I see has been happening, especially with like this push now because Trump embraced Bitcoin. Like, now it's like, oh, we got to get the Democrats to do it. But no, actually you don't. You really don't have to get the Democrats to do that. Actually, just what you need to do is just stop them from putting any kind of ban, but that's about it. You don't need them to embrace anything. And the less they know about Bitcoin, actually, the better. The less these politicians understand Bitcoin, the better. Because once they understand it, they can start thinking about things like 51% attack. We don't want them to know about that stuff. So it's much better that we keep them in the dark, because they are a danger. They're a danger to us as people. And that has been clear for a very long time, that our government is not on our side. From the time, as we talked about earlier, about Edward Snowden, WikiLeaks, Chelsea Manning, right? Government is not on our side. Government surveils us. And they're going to keep trying to push for more surveillance power against us as citizens. So the less they know about Bitcoin, the better. So grateful to you, Trey, for not... I always say I'm grateful to Troy. So
I'm grateful to Troy too.
Grateful to Troy Cross, but grateful to you, Trey, for really sticking to your own beliefs on that and trying to make this a really great show. I'm so grateful that you picked up the show after Mark had to step away. It was really great that Mark had this idea and actually took the steps to do it. And it's been so great to see somebody else try to carry that torch. And I think you did a fantastic job rebranding the show. And I think, like, I'm very excited for your personal life and you're having a baby and all these life changes. It's very exciting for you. So congratulations. And I'm sad that we won't hear your voice as often anymore. I think that's something that we will miss, whether it's under this name or something else. I mean, I'm hopeful that you'll come back in some capacity because we do need voices like you. So I'm so grateful that you were able to carry this forward in the way that you did. And I am excited for the future, for what the future brings. And I'm hoping that what you have done will inspire other people to take a step forward and to also start creating their own content around the ideas that we have talked about today and their own ideas. Just so long that it's, not like the standard thing about Austrian economics and whatever, hyper capitalism. Just having people talk about different ideas. I think that's the most important thing, whether it's under the label Progressive Bitcoiner or not. So I'm really hopeful and hoping that you have inspired many people and that there will be somebody, just in the way that you did by taking over this show, that there will be somebody else or several somebody else's or more, dozens, who will come out and start doing their own thing, whatever it is, but within, picking up where you are now leaving this space. So I'm hoping and hopeful that will happen, because I think that you did make a very good impression on a lot of people. So this is a call to action to the listeners. Call to action. Only you can do it. Like, the power is within you. That's how this works. That's how grassroots works. It takes everybody. It takes a village.
Yeah, so absolutely. Well, that's a great point to leave off on. Thank you. I appreciate it. And so many people appreciate you. You've been on the show the most since I've been hosting, at least 4 or 5 times at this point. So thank you for always coming on.
Thank you for making me the Lynn Alden of the Progressive Bitcoiner.
That's so funny. Yeah. Thank you. And definitely a call to action. Everyone can do their part. And it'll be interesting going forward. And both of us will see people around, and it'll be interesting. But thank you so much, Margot. I will leave it off here. And thanks for everyone listening to the show. And we'll see you down the line at some point.
Definitely. Thanks, Trey.